Sussex Police Constable found driving in a manner which was neither necessary, reasonable or proportionate, kills a man, gets no criminal charges, but faces a misconduct hearing. Kent Police Special, driven out of the force after lying about his driving qualifications. North Yorkshire Police apologised for not bothering to act against illegal gatherings in the area. And misogyny, the latest in a string of so-called hate crimes. When will these women just learn to leave the politics to us men? And Hampshire Police pay out as police illegally record man in his home. This and more coming up. Don't forget, these reports are daily, Monday to Friday. Please remember to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss any future uploads. And if you do appreciate the work I do, please consider joining the channel Patreon for as little as just £3 a month to help me continue to provide this content. Hello, ladies, gentlemen, boys, girls, innies, outies, and of course in-betweeners. My name's Dan. Welcome back to another PAP Reports. It's Wednesday, 8th of July, 2020. Sussex Police Constable Richard Harris, who, in the early hours of August the 25th, 2017, while responding to an emergency call in Brighton, lost control of his police vehicle and ended up mowing down 79-year-old David Ormisher, is to face a gross misconduct hearing. PC Harris was responding to an emergency call, but the claims against him are that his driving was in a manner which was neither necessary, reasonable or proportionate in the circumstances, including those of a 999 response. The IOPC investigated and in 2018 gave their file to the CPS. However, as you can guess, the CPS didn't press charges against PC Harris even after the family asked for a review. At the time, Superintendent Paul Betts said it was a tragic accident where the pedestrian was hit by a patrol car responding to an emergency. He said the officers performed first aid and immediately called for paramedics, but Mr. Ormisher died at the scene. Mr. Betts said both officers in the car were understandably extremely distraught. Oh dear, the police were a bit upset. But the family lost a loved one, and I'm pretty sure that trumps the police's feelings, especially seeing as he got to keep his job and avoid any penalty, evidently. Well, until now that is, and even though he is facing a misconduct hearing, it doesn't mean that he's going to be found guilty. However, if he is, then doesn't that mean that the police found his actions to have caused the death due to his driving? And that would mean, ultimately, that he would be guilty of killing Mr. Ormisher, but yet still got away with it. That is simply fucked up. Harris's hearing starts on Monday, the 13th. Senior Police Scotland officers have apparently written a very strongly worded letter to councils across Scotland asking local authorities to help reduce the number of protests and counter-protests due to public safety concerns. Well, don't you think it's a bit late for that? I mean, you've allowed tens of thousands of people to protest during what's been called a pandemic, global health crisis, and the people protesting are apparently the ones who are most at risk. But you weren't so bothered about public safety then, was you? Their letter said protests and counter-protests have often required significant resource deployment from the police, meaning officers are taken out of their local area and are unable to attend to other demands. It said the issues and grievances being aired are often rooted in wider social and political issues and can act as proxies for ingrained sectarianism. The sectarianism, for those of you who don't know what it means, is best described as what you would expect from a virtue signalling white woman at a BLM protest. In other words, an excessive attachment to a particular sect or party. The letter went on to say, protecting the safety of the public is paramount and all Police Scotland operations are planned and conducted with this in mind. They have, however, accepted that many protests were entirely legitimate. But again, the police have always had the power to restrict protests, even legitimate ones under the Public Health Act, but didn't bother until it was protests from groups of people that the police couldn't virtue signal with. Police Scotland mentioned in their strongly worded letter ongoing issues they are currently dealing with, such as the 26th of June stabbings and their duties policing beer gardens. I'm not joking, the report in the letter said they are also pointing out the ongoing duties of the police force, such as proactive patrols of beer gardens. They said, we live in a democratic society and police have a duty to protect the rights of both individuals and groups who wish to peacefully protest or counter-protest. But this has to be balanced against the rights of others who might be impacted upon by such activity and will not accept or tolerate violence or thuggery. Well, what can I say? It must be So difficult for Police Scotland to be wandering around beer gardens looking for people to fine. Maybe if the police did their job properly instead of pandering to public persuasion, they wouldn't be having these issues with protests. North Yorkshire Police Detective Superintendent Steve Thomas has apologised at a town council meeting for the slow response to an end-of-term lockdown party on Harrogate's Stray last month. The gathering that not only generated lots of calls from the public but also left the area in an absolute state with the litter strewn across the place. The rubbish left on the ground included alcohol bottles and drug paraphernalia such as laughing gas canisters, which prompted health warnings from police and anti-litter action from Harrogate Borough Council. Detective Superintendent Steve Thomas said, "There is a real health issue with it. I think it is seen as something that is okay to do and you're not going to get into trouble, but it has some real significant health implications, particularly if they are mixing it with alcohol or other drugs. We didn't get it 100% right," said Detective Superintendent Steve Thomas at the meeting of the Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. He said, "I'm really sorry that we weren't able to get to grips with it in time for it not to affect the people who reported it to us. I was working on the evening that it happened, and as soon as we were aware, we had deployed through the force control room additional resources. Unfortunately, once you get a gathering of that size, it is a question of trying to engage as best as possible. I'm not saying we got that entirely right, and we certainly learnt from it." Well, as long as you learnt from it, then that's okay, I guess. Just like police forces learn from everything they don't want to get into trouble over. It's been the same across the country. There have been these gatherings all over the place, and we have heard more about the police allowing them to go on than actually stopping them. And then in the next breath, there's reports of injuries or deaths, even injuries to the police. So if you were looking to learn from it, you would have learned from other police forces' failures and made sure you didn't make the same mistakes. Oh, but wait, silly me. You did say you learned from it, didn't you? So I guess my rant is just meaningless. A 16-year-old boy from Tower Hamlets in London believes police stopped him 5 times in a fortnight because of the colour of his skin. Rhys Lewis said he was handcuffed and questioned under the Misuse of Drugs Act, which is exactly what the police do. Misuse the Drugs Act. He said they just got out of the car, didn't even say who they were. At the time it made me pretty angry. It's embarrassing because you're in a street, there's people around you and they're just searching you, and people are looking thinking here's a criminal when really I hadn't done anything at all. Which unfortunately, Rhys, does happen to a lot of us. Rhys's mum said stop and search. I think it can be positive if it's done the correct way, which is identifying yourself, the reason why you've stopped them, and searching them, not just straight away jumping out the car saying you smell of cannabis. It made him feel violated. Now, there isn't a lot of information about this incident, which unfortunately leaves it wide open to interpretation. It could well be that the police are bullying him. Regardless to his skin colour, it could be that the police are actually discriminating against him, which nobody should be discriminated against. It could be that the lad was acting suspiciously for a bit of excitement and shat himself when it started getting on top. There's a dozen reasons why this could have happened. But the only real problem I can see here that's clear is that the police failed to follow Go Wisely under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. They are obligated to explain the grounds for the search, explain the object of the search, show their warrant card if not in uniform, identify themselves, tell you which station they're from, explain your entitlement to a copy of the search record, the legal power for which they're searching you under, and explain that you're being detained. So that's grounds, object of search, warrant card, identity of officer, station the officer's from, entitlement to a copy of the search form, legal power you're being searched under, and you must be told you're being detained. Go Wisely, Gowisely, which appears to have been missed completely, which makes the search and detainment unlawful. But even Rhys hasn't explained what makes him think the police have targeted him because of his colour, only that he'd been stopped 5 times in 2 weeks. So it's very difficult to say for sure, and I've no doubt there will be plenty of views in the comments, and I'll look forward to reading them all. Merseyside Police Sergeant 52-year-old Peter Robert Jordan appeared in Warrington Magistrates Court yesterday, accused of an assault which took place at St Anne Street Police Station in Liverpool, in which a detained man, Gary Tramp, left the station with facial injuries after his arrest on December 16, 2018. After the IOPC investigated the allegations, they passed a file to the CPS, who decided to charge Jordan with Section 47 assault occasioning actual bodily harm. Jordan pleaded not guilty to the offence, and District Judge Andrew Short sent the case to Chester Crown Court for trial on August the 4th and gave him unconditional bail until his appearance. Ex-Kent Police Special Constable Thomas Ryder has been placed on the police barred register and would have been dismissed had he not resigned after a misconduct hearing. Ryder, who did not attend yesterday's hearing, gained access to a marked police vehicle at a police station in Ashford after lying about his qualifications to a supervisor on the night of March 13, 2019, going out on patrol knowing that he didn't have the required training or qualifications to go on patrol on his own. I mean, I suppose it's nothing to be shocked about. I mean, the police simply take the word of their brothers in blue, whereas everyone else has to provide evidence. He even managed to get out on his own in a police vehicle for a second shift, even after having cancelled a training shift earlier that same day in order to attend a personal problem. Superintendent John Phillips of Kent Police's Professional Standards Department said, "We have a thorough training requirement for all new recruits to ensure that officers are capable of dealing professionally with a range of incidents before they patrol alone. In this case, a new recruit willfully ignored those procedures, exposing the public and the organisation to serious risk." Well, it seems like the last straw for people like me, as in white heterosexual males, as campaigners are now trying to force police to start recording misogyny as a, yeah, you guessed it, a hate crime. We will literally not be able to look or speak out in public for fear of being arrested for hate. Looking at someone in the wrong way may be deemed as misogyny or homophobia or racist. We might even get overheard in a conversation as somebody's walking past. Might take offence to what's being said. The next thing, your life is heading down the pan for a hate crime offence on your record. So we won't be able to be patronising or sexist. Mind you, let's be fair, most birds can't take it anyway. I mean, surely women have better things to be thinking about, like shoes or what to make for dinner. I don't know why they're worrying their pretty little heads over it. I really don't know what the problem is. Most of these extreme feminists are lesbians anyway. They just need to have an orgasm now and again, and they'll be less frustrated. All right, I'm sorry. But these reports are always so serious. I promise that's not going to be a regular thing because, well, I wouldn't want to offend anyone that might be cooking my dinner tomorrow. Anyway, back to the serious stuff. Sylvie Pope. Damn, if I was 20 years younger, I would let her cook for me all day long. Is who you can blame for this. She's the one helping to spearhead the campaign for misogyny to be treated as a hate crime. She said the new measures do not create any new crimes, but instead offers the police a way to implement prevention strategies. Prevention from what exactly? A boo-boo on your feelings? Prevention from people telling jokes, having fun? You see, us men, well, we make fun of men as well, so we're like equal opportunity offenders. But we're not allowed anything to protect us from people taking a piss, are we? Pope, the founder of, get this, the Greater Manchester Citizens Misogyny Hate Crime Campaign, or in its short form, the We Hate Men group, said police can start doing it from today. Now that the mayors have backed the calls, we hope to see more police forces adopting it immediately. 7 forces in the UK are already doing this. The power is in naming the problem. When you name what is happening, it raises the issue of misogyny among the police. The power is in the data. When we record misogynistic hate crime, police can prioritise prevention strategies and discover local hotspots. Local hotspots? What, like a comedy club? Misogyny is an intersexual problem, she says. On an everyday basis, women are experiencing street-based harassment, violence and harassment in the workplace, and domestic abuse. It perpetuates a culture where women don't feel safe. Well, I think you should get over it, sweetheart. I mean, domestic abuse is already covered under the law. Harassment in the workplace is, guess what, covered under the law. And violence, I'll give you 3 guesses. So why is there a need to arm militant feminists? I'm in my 40s and I've never met a woman who's taken offence at something I've said, although I'm sure that will change after this report. And trust me, I like strong independent women who most certainly would have told me. Ms Pope, a 22-year-old... Well, there you go. She's 22 years old. She's a bloody millennial. No wonder. She said the campaign was not aiming to lock men up or drag them through the criminal justice system, but was instead about prevention and awareness, and ruining people's lives easily. There are issues of sexism and racism within the police itself, but the campaign hopes to tackle that, she added. But what's racism got to do with misogyny? If anyone can answer that for me, please do. Please let me know in the comments. Look, I'm not trying to play down any discrimination, but there must be such a minuscule amount of people who actually have contempt for women. It's far more likely that people have contempt for the person, whether they're a woman or not. And this just brings another level of ridiculousness to blight people's lives. I guarantee you, right here and now, there are more women out there who hate men than men who hate women. And giving these tools to these militant millennial feminists who have no idea how a real world works and simply want a project that they can tweet about is a very dangerous idea, especially when everything mentioned is already covered under the law. The only difference is the added hate element will do more to destroy people's lives who are charged with it than the normal existing laws. A social worker from Bradford was jailed yesterday at Leeds Crown Court after being found guilty of preying on an 81-year-old woman suffering from dementia and another vulnerable male victim. Hilary Tideswell was sentenced to 7 years and 9 months after she took advantage of the pensioner after she found out the pensioner had $500,000 in savings and a house. 63-year-old Tideswell managed to get unrestricted access to the victim's bank accounts, allowing her to get her hands on £550,000 of her money and other information, which allowed her to even sell the victim's house from right under her nose by illegally obtaining power of attorney. But what's particularly interesting about this is that Humberside Police are happy to forego charges against the care worker from yesterday's video, Tina Bardsley from Grimsby, after the victim died. But in this case, West Yorkshire Police have said, at the heart of this case were two vulnerable victims who have now sadly passed away. Despite the victims no longer being with us, we have been determined to bring those responsible for these crimes to justice. She now has time in jail to consider the consequences of her actions. It is particularly distressing when people within a position of trust abuse this to their own advantage. This right here is why police should not be given discretion. They should simply follow and enforce the law as written. There is no consistency when dealing with the police, and it gives them not only the ability to abuse their powers, as we see all too often, but also to abuse the public's trust by choosing not to bother with some crimes. They continued, safeguards are in place to protect the vulnerable, but they are not fail-safe, and any person concerned about the welfare of financial affairs of a relative or friend should always report the concerns to the relevant local authority or police. If you have been a victim of fraud, there is a network of support and information available to you. Sometimes people choose not to report fraud or seek advice because they are embarrassed that they fell for a scam, con, swindle, or any other word used to describe the crime. Remember that fraud is a crime and that fraudsters will constantly reinvent themselves to find new ways of tricking people. Anyone can be a victim. And remember, it's not just fraud abuse, as we saw from yesterday's report. So if you have anyone in a care home or they have a home carer, keep an eye out for changes in their behaviour. See how they react to their carers. Notice if their demeanour changes when somebody walks in the room. These people are supposed to be trusted to look after and care for our loved ones. And there are some out there that will simply want to take advantage of our parents, grandparents, or other older relatives. Hampshire Police have had to pay out £2,500 to a New Forest victim of burglary after police unlawfully filmed him in his home. A tribunal heard that 2 Hampshire police constables attended the address of the man to inform him that no further inquiries would be carried out in relation to a burglary at a second property he owned. No surprise there. Due to the victim being known to the police as someone who has a history of making complaints, a superior officer told the constables to record their visit. However, police failed to inform the man until the end of their 20-minute conversation. The tribunal heard that the man was calm throughout, but one of the constables became exasperated at his generalisations about police, and at this point pointed out that he was in fact recording. The tribunal concluded that recording violated the man's privacy rights under Section 8 of the Human Rights Act and was in no way justified by the Regulation of Investigatory Power Act 2000. The man said Hampshire police feel they can get away with ignoring crimes, but can't be bothered to even try and investigate crimes. They claim they have few officers, yet no problem sending 2 to spy on me. I'm concerned that more innocent people will be secretly spied upon by useless Hampshire police, where its policy appears to be mind over matter for crime. They don't mind, and victims of crime like me don't matter. I used to be a medic, and if I broke the law I would be charged, so why are Hampshire Police allowing officers to break a law? A vote of no confidence in police and the Police and Crime Commissioner from me, he said. A Hampshire Police spokesperson said Hampshire Constabulary guidance states that body-worn video users should let the person know they are being recorded as soon as practicable, and that body-worn video is an overt recording tool. It can be used in private dwellings where users are lawfully on the premises. However, discretion should be exercised and recording should only take place when relevant to the incident. The spokesperson added Hampshire Constabulary has accepted that the complainant's rights were breached, and in this case we apologised, with the officers involved receiving management advice. On the 13th of February I spoke about 28-year-old Jermaine Barker, who was shot dead by police. Barker was part of a gang attempting to break a prisoner from custody as the van transporting him arrived at Wood Green Crown Court in December 2015. After an investigation, an imitation Uzi was found in the rear footwell, but investigators believed that Baker could not have grabbed hold of it to fire at the police, even though the firearms officer, known as W80, said he fired in self-defence. In February, Priti Patel announced a formal inquiry to examine the circumstances around it and act as an inquest into the death of Barker. Following the IOPC investigation, the CPS decided not to charge W80 with any criminal charges. Papers submitted to the Court of Appeal on behalf of the IOPC say that Officer W80 thought Mr Barker was going for a gun, but the IOPC said it was mistaken and unreasonable belief. And now they are challenging a court ruling that blocks them from bringing misconduct proceedings against Officer W80 for the use of excessive force. A submission from Tim Owen QC, representing the IOPC, said W80 maintains that Mr Baker moved his hands up towards a bag slung around his shoulder, despite calls to put his hands on the dashboard. W80 said this led to him believing that Barker was reaching for a weapon, but evidence shows there was no weapon in the bag. Further evidence shows that the instruction was not to put the hands on the dashboard, but rather to put your hands in the air. In 2019, the High Court ruled that an attempt by the IOPC to launch disciplinary proceedings against him for gross misconduct was unlawful because the watchdog had applied the wrong legal test in assessing the officer's claim that he had acted in self-defence. The court said the IOPC should have applied the criminal law test, meaning W80's belief that his life was in danger when he opened fire would not have to be judged on whether it was reasonable. On the first day of the three-day appeal, Tim Owens QC said the High Court ruling was wrong, and that if the judgment is allowed to stand, then firearms officers who make honest but unreasonable mistakes when using potentially lethal force cannot face any disciplinary proceedings for their conduct. So if the court do not reverse their decision, basically, it means that police firearms officers will pretty much be able to get away with just about every unreasonable act that results in the death of somebody. I guess it was only a matter of time before that happened. On the 1st of July and in yesterday's PAP Reports, we touched on the subject of the Lambeth abuse inquiry, where pedos infiltrated the borough's children's home in the 60s and senior figures, including councillors and police officers, turned a blind eye, allegedly allowing prominent politicians and businessmen in Lambeth to trade the children for abuse. The inquiry was set to hear how care home boss John Carroll was a convicted pedo who was allowed to continue working with children. Turns out that John Carroll's bid to foster two boys in the late 1980s was blocked when Southwark Council discovered he had been convicted of abuse in the past. But when asked to provide an independent assessment of Carroll's application to Lambeth Council told Southwark not to be too rigorous, as he was already in a trusted position running a care home. Clive Walsh, a senior officer in social services at Southwark who blocked the fostering bid at the time, told the independent inquiry that he also made a recommendation that Carroll should no longer run a children's home. He told how at a meeting between Lambeth and Southwark councils, an official who had overseen a disciplinary hearing involving Carroll was angry that he had interfered in the council's business. Their demand was that the record of my view of the inappropriateness of Mr Carroll working as the head of the home be expunged from the record. He said Southwark politicians at the meeting were initially sympathetic to the view that Lambeth's business was Lambeth's business, until they realised that Carroll had committed a serious abuse offence. They then became angry, he said. They were outraged that there was a man running a children's home in Lambeth who had a conviction as an adult for abuse. They were very angry about that, and they were also angry about the failure to disclose that to us. Carroll was later sacked for fiddling his expenses and was jailed in 1998 for a slew of abuse offences. The inquiry is ongoing. Now, I really do hope we get some names of these prominent politicians and businessmen. No one should ever be allowed anonymity over cases like this. A very big thank you to all of the channel supporters, especially the channel Patreon supporters. Your support is truly appreciated and really does help. And that's all I have for you today. Please like, share, comment and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts, as I know many of you will. Until next time, stay safe, look after each other, film the police, and of course, other officials.
Good night, all.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you like the content and you'd like to help support the channel, you can do so. In the description of every video there are some links to ways that you're able to help support the channel so I can continue putting out content. If you're unable to help us in that way, hit that subscribe button up the top there. If you haven't already, become a subscriber. That is support enough. Share the videos, comment, like, it all helps. If you're looking for something else to watch, up top there is my latest video. Down the bottom there is a video that YouTube recommends for you.